I'm Vinnie Politan. We begin this program this hour with big breaking news in the biggest case on our docket here at Court TV, the biggest true crime case and trial in the nation. The case involving the 4 University of Idaho students who were brutally murdered. The suspect in that case has been offered and accepted a plea deal. Do you hear me? A plea deal for the killer of Kaylee, Maddie, Ethan, and Xana, the 4 students from the University of Idaho. This is how it all went down. Apparently, the prosecutor sent a letter today to the families of the victims, indicating that the suspect, the now soon-to-be admitted killer, is going to accept a deal where he will plead guilty to all counts, agree to a sentence of 4 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each of the victims, will waive his right to any appeal, bringing finality to the case and to the conviction. And all this is now apparently scheduled to go down on July 2nd. Now, obviously, this is going to cause a lot of reactions. We have seen one already from the family of Kaylee Goncalves. I want to put that up on the screen because this is where I am going to begin this discussion tonight of this breaking news. It's true. We are beyond furious at the state of Idaho. They have failed us. Please give us some time. This was very unexpected. We appreciate all your love and support. Let's keep that up there for a second so everyone can read it. What is important here? What is significant? First of all, they are beyond furious. They wanted this to go all the way through to the death penalty, number 1. Also, this was very unexpected. That tells you how out of the loop the victims' families were in this decision. Now, by law, it is the people of the state versus the defendant. The families, the victims' families are not a party to the case, but they have some rights. They should have a lot more rights, but they don't. But now we're learning that in a state like Idaho, which permits the death penalty, who is the death penalty for? It's for the worst of the worst. Who is this guy? A psychotic mass murderer? And he's the one who's going to get a deal. He's the one getting the deal tonight. With, at a minimum, the Goncalves family furious. I don't know about the other families. They may not want to go through a trial. But the law is the law. The law in Idaho is that the worst of the worst is for the death penalty. If not this guy, then who? What is it there for? Why does Idaho even have it? You might as well get rid of it tonight. If someone like this is not the one you're going to attempt to give the death penalty to, what do you have it for then? To make your jobs easier? Yeah, it's a tough trial. Yeah, it'll be 3 months. It'll be brutal. There's a lot of preparation. Everything is at stake. Nothing is a gimme. Nothing is a layup. But that's your job. That's what you're elected and that's what you're hired to do the cases that aren't easy. And the death penalty should not be used merely as a way to make jobs easier for prosecutors. Whether it's the prosecutors at the trial or the ones who have to fight the appeals, it doesn't matter. It's your job. And who is this defendant? Why does he, by the way, why was this case easy for prosecutors to prosecute? Relatively easy. How did they catch this guy? The DNA from the knife sheath, right? Now, how was that knife sheath left behind? Why? Under what circumstances? What do we know? Well, we know Kaylee Goncalves fought back. My guess is likely in that struggle, the knife sheath somehow ended up on the bed. She fought. She fought harder than prosecutors are willing to fight for justice in this case. And again, you don't have to be for or against the death penalty. That's irrelevant. Your thoughts about the death penalty are irrelevant. It's the law. It's the law in Idaho. But the question tonight is, who is it for if it's not for this guy? And it's not for Kaylee Goncalves and her family. All right. This hour, we've got a lot of people who are going to come in who have been part of our coverage of this case for years now. Joining us right now, Court TV's Senior Director of Courtroom Coverage, Grace Wong, who, by the way, today attended a hearing on this case in Pennsylvania. Also with us, forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Mogen. He's the host of the Body Bags podcast. And retired police commander Mike King, also the host of Profiling Evil, the podcast. Evil, of course. Grace, what happened here?
Well, the defense had subpoenaed a number of witnesses for what would have been their mitigation phase. If he had been convicted and convicted of the top count, he would have been death eligible. So the defense was preparing a mitigation case with these witnesses, even though it's not clear as to what exactly they would contribute. But we heard from a number of them because they objected to being called as witnesses in his case, in his trial. And the judge had to take testimony from them because he had to determine whether, A, that they would be material to the defense case, and B, whether the hardship that they claimed to have would be undue. That ultimately these witnesses said that they did not want to be associated with the case and they feared the fallout for being associated with Bryan Kohberger, and they didn't feel that they had that much more to add than what they had already told law enforcement.
So let me ask you, Grace, is this impacting this decision, do you think? Is there a connection between what happened in Pennsylvania today and how this all is going down now?
Well, that's an interesting question. It is a coincidence that we heard from witnesses today who said that they did not want to testify in Kohberger's case. It's not for certain, but certainly, the mitigation part of it should be easy. I mean, if you call on people that want to try to save his life, and these are people that were connected to him, to his past, when when he was not an adult, and they just didn't want to testify for a number of reasons, mainly because they feared the fallout from this case.
So is there any way that prosecutors could interpret that, oh my goodness, this is going to be an issue and this case is never going to go away? That if people are not even willing to testify for the defendant, that it's not worth going after a death penalty in a case like this? Could that in any way possibly be a reason behind this?
Well, they had the evidence. I mean, really, this is a question for the prosecutors. They had.
They have the evidence to prove the case. I'm wondering why they're doing this tonight. Why they are throwing in the towel and giving this guy a plea. It's a plea deal. You are giving something to the defendant, and he's waiving his right to appeal. And I was just wondering if all the issues that the defense is having and people not willing to come forward, prosecutors are thinking down the road that somehow, some way, some defense attorney is going to turn this into an issue and get something overturned, and then we'll have to do it again and again and again. That's what I'm wondering. Joseph Scott Mogen, your reaction tonight to what has gone down today, which is, we're shocked, but the Goncalves family was not expecting this.
No, they weren't, and I get the impression that they were not duly informed. At least, they're saying that they need time to digest this, and I think that that's certainly an understatement. You begin to think about this, everything that they've been through since, November of 2022. We might think we've been through some things. There's nothing that we can say or do that would ever compare to what these family members have gone through. And, the waters are troubled now. They have been stirred and stirred and stirred over these past few months, can I say weeks perhaps, particularly with things that have arisen in the media. I'm just, my big question, I think, at the end of the day is what suddenly has changed to create this new tenor with this case moving forward? Because, look, if the family, it's one thing for the state to be satisfied with it. And you made a great point, Vin, because this is the state of Idaho versus Kohberger. It's not the families. And, we hear prosecutors prattle on about, representing the victims and the families and all that. And maybe they are, I don't know, but it's I think that for many, it's going to be less than a satisfying outcome. Many people might retreat to the point where they're going to say, well, at least we know that he's going to be put away. If everything we're hearing is accurate, and I don't really have any doubt about that, but it is rather dissatisfying. But, my opinion really doesn't matter here. It's the state of Idaho. What could they have proved in this case? Hopefully we're going to find out more. And I got to tell you, Vin, I'm hoping that we're going to find out more from him if this moves forward in a reasonable manner. Are they going to have him stand before the court and deliver? I mean, allocute. We got that with BTK. Boy, we missed it by a mile with Chris Watts. I think a lot of people were salivating over that, wanting to hear exactly what happened. I'm hoping that we're going to hear what happened if this is what we're left with.
Well, an allocution, it should be part of every guilty plea. When I was a prosecutor in New Jersey, obviously never had a case like this. I had less serious cases where defendants had to tell the judge exactly what they did to create a factual basis so the guilty plea could, in fact, be accepted. But covering all the different jurisdictions across the country, Grace, you and I have been doing it for years. We know different judges, different states, they all do it differently on these guilty pleas. Let me just ask you, Grace, on that front, do you expect that he'll have to allocute and actually say what he did at his guilty plea, or just say, yeah, I'm guilty of what I'm charged with?
Well, I hope the deal would include complete and total allocution. There's so many questions, and this case has been shrouded in mystery and secrecy from the very beginning. All these motions have been filed under seal. Witness lists are under seal. Even the documents that do get released are redacted heavily. And, a trial is a search for the truth under the rules of evidence. And no matter, even if he does allocute, there's so many questions that are still remain. And I hope that this deal requires him to explain why, right? That's the big question. Why did he target these four students? Why, what was there any there was no provocation. So why choose these four? And I mean, I can't help but think that one of that maybe a couple of the witnesses, that a couple of the victims, he might have killed because they were witnesses to what he had done to one or the other, and that would have been an aggravating factor for the death penalty. So it's there. Like I said, there's just so many questions still unanswered that a trial would have unveiled so much more, and it's a very unsatisfactory conclusion. So I do hope that there is a full allocution and that these documents are unsealed.
Yeah, Mike King, what are your thoughts tonight? Where's your head at right now?
I'll tell you, I sure didn't see this coming, Vinny, and I'm really glad to be on with Grace and with Joe Scott tonight, because we've been talking about this case for a long time. I guess I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate with a caveat, and that caveat is, how I feel about the victims of crime and the families and the victims' rights bills that have become established over the years, something that we fought so hard for back in the 90s when I was at the district attorney and then at the attorney general's office. But on the flip side of this, I'm really glad that they're able to secure 4 first-degree felony convictions, and hopefully that burglary will be added on top of it. The question becomes, why didn't the families know more? And were they really brought into the mix and discussed? Because prosecutors across the board are taught, or at least asked, to reason with the families. And usually the families will come back, even knowing that they would prefer the same eye for eye kind of resolution in a criminal case. But you do hear these families who say, I'm so tired of listening for decades this case brought up over and again as someone goes through the appeals process. If I know that he doesn't have a chance to ever appeal, if I know he's never going to walk out of the prison, that's good enough for a lot of families, but the families deserve to be involved. And I think that's what's got us also incredibly disturbed right now, and something that I hope the state of Idaho comes back and answers, and that those families are able to acknowledge, yeah, we had a chance to be a part of this decision process.
Yeah, Mike, do you think we'll see any of those habeas corpus or anything like that down the road, Mike? I'm looking at the Menendez brothers walking out soon. I mean, there's a difference, and there's a difference between your life. Life on death row is different than life. It is a different life. These people who get life in prison, it's a life. They wake up in the morning, they look forward to something. It's not the life that any of us want to live or should live, but it is a life, and there's a socialization process. They look forward to things. I mean, it's a different scenario. And by the way, they'll file motions anyway.
You're absolutely right. And this is the disturbing part with how we're changing now. We somehow forget that justice ruled and said, never again are you going to walk free. And then we see something like what's going on with the Menendez brothers. I had a phone call just recently with an inmate that was serving in the hole, life in prison, down in the hole with 1 hour of out time per day. A guy named Dan Lafferty, who murdered a mother and her little baby in a case that I worked on and I've talked about a lot. And Dan told me just the other day that he's now out in general population because things have gotten hard on the correctional system. They're trying to loosen up, free up more space. That is absolutely unacceptable. And for a family who lost a child, and here we have 4 children that were lost as a result of a killer, to be told, hey, we're going to now give this guy commissary. We're going to give him a chance to go out and hang out in the yard and participate in prison programs, maybe even continue working on his education. That's incredibly offensive when this individual will apparently plead guilty to murdering savagely their children.
Yeah, and who knows? You know, you get some justices who see the world a little bit differently. 30 years down the road, all of a sudden, life without parole is cruel and unusual punishment. You don't know what the future holds. None of us do. We do know what the future of a death penalty conviction is. Let me ask you, Justice Scott Morgan, I mentioned about the key piece of evidence was the DNA. That's how they tracked him down. That was found on the snap of the knife sheath. Do you think that perhaps Kaylee Goncalves fighting for her life is the reason that prosecutors and investigators got that piece of evidence?
Yeah, perhaps it is. And let's not forget that with the nail scrapings also came up with 3 profiles. Kohberger was one of them. We're assuming that Maddie was potentially another, and of course Kaylee. I think that coupled with the evidence that came out about the purchases of the knife, or the purchase of the knife, maybe an attempt to replace the sheath, weighs into this a bit. And I'm just strictly talking about physical evidence right now at this point, none of the circumstantial stuff. I think that the totality of that and that alone, and plus look, those numbers are astronomical, Vin, that we're talking about, even with the touch DNA. And that's really hard for any defense attorney to defeat. The only thing that can really attack is how it was collected. We got an indication that was probably going to be under attack moving forward. You know, how it was collected, that this is quote unquote new science, you know, all those sorts of things. So they kind of showed their cards from the beginning. That was probably the road that they were going to go down. But after a period of time, you know that dog's just not going to hunt. It's going to get, if you can't prove that there was some kind of malfeasance on the part of the police officers or the forensic specialists that were working on this case, then, you know, it becomes elementary at that point because the numbers are so just monumental to overcome.
Grace, do we know July 2nd how it's going to go down yet, or we're still waiting to get details about that?
I think we're still waiting to get details about that, but I You know, it's funny that Mike King had mentioned that he has an opportunity to pursue his education in prison, and he certainly does. I mean, he was a student of crime, and his thesis involved studying criminals and how and why they did things. And he had a very detailed questionnaire before it was taken down, asking questions about, you know, how criminals felt when they committed the crime, and there was like a rating system, whether they felt guilty or not. So he has a fascination for pursuing that kind of knowledge. And I can't help but think, but once he's in prison, he almost has this entire prison environment as his lab. To continue his studies and to pursue that. And there's nothing that's stopping him from doing that once he's incarcerated.
Yeah, unless you're on death row, then you're by yourself and you're isolated. But that's not going to happen. Grace Wong, thank you so much. Mike King, thank you. Joe Scott Morgan, are you going to join us a little bit later? We've got more on the big breaking news, a deal in the Idaho student murders case.